Probably gonna slip up on words, but I am going to read a creepypasta called Squidward Suicide. If it is liked, if people like me reading this, I'll do it more. Maybe this will become my thing. I doubt that, but this is several takes, so my throat's sore. Especially after 8 takes of singing earlier. That was a lot of singing, guys. Which now there's 3 of you, which is grand. Hi, newbie. This isn't a cry video. I know that's how you found me. That's awesome, but this is creepypasta. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't. But it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There's a problem with the series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, often sometimes lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Evolve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related giggles. So when we saw the title card Squidward Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. And one of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. Happy-go-lucky music plays as is normal. And the story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. Your SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubbles splash screen comes and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, the sound is synced up with animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd, and they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone has hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. But since we weren't the writers, we didn't question his appeal to children yet. So, the shot goes to Squidward, sitting on the edge of his bed looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point, there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He sat there, blinking in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes, and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while a sound in the background, very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. And by slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at the shots 10 seconds side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second. Then it goes back to normal. The wind through the trees sound slowly gets louder and louder, and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is this sound and Squidward sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes and the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment that would be that good to produce a sound of that quality. Below the sound of wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second. It's a hard time pinning it. We've watched this show twice, so pardon me if things seem too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloody, one eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open and entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of a photographer. There's no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle's completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping it was a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half body frame. There's now what would appear to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if there's a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasted at longer intervals now, and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, but he knew he had to. This time the photo appeared to be a little girl, older than the first child. She's laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. About 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all as his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep-voiced laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop on the 4th and backed it up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but the scene's different. The entrails were just being pulled out of the body from a stomach wound in a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood dripping down it, and the animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, and we couldn't tell what. He went to the next same thing. He wanted to go first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating and sound editors gasping at the scream. The first five frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from video. Saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. The kid's eye focusing on it. Even saw the 2 frames of the kid begin to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had called that creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived with about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why we called him down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the frames were shown and screaming all sound stopped again. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned, and the deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hand a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters on the walls around him in his bed. He flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. The episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry about this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most of the people at this point had already left, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice, severe to imprint the entirety of it onto my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file showed it was edited by new material. However, the time strap up was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches. The time swamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out. We don't know what happened, and to this day nobody does. There's an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child seen was identified, no clues gathered from the data, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now if something happened and I can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. That was depressing, and now I must try and upload this. That was depressing. I didn't remember most of that. Oh my gosh.